Welcome to How We Get Through, the podcast where we share stories, mental health insights, and healing advice on life's everyday challenges. I'm your host, Jen, a licensed therapist and founder of the How We Get Through app. Today's guest is Betsy Byler, a licensed professional substance abuse counselor in Wisconsin. In this episode, Betsy sheds light on the biggest challenge that our kids face today with substances: access. Yes, things sure have changed since we were young. So take a listen as Betsy gives us the ins and outs of what our kids are exposed to and how we can help them. Hi, and welcome back to the How We Get Through podcast. Today's guest is Betsy Byler. She's a mom, a wife, a trauma therapist, substance use counselor, podcaster, and trainer in Wisconsin. Her passion is to help others find healing from trauma and recovery from substances. Betsy, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So exciting. Okay, so we like to start off like every series with a mental health myth. And being in the substance use space, we would love to know yours.
So I think a myth is that it doesn't matter if you talk to your kids about drugs and alcohol because they won't listen.
Oh, that's good.
Having raised teenagers myself, I know that it feels like they don't hear anything that we say. And sometimes even that they remember stuff that we're like, what? That's the thing you chose to recall? That is not the point of that day or that lesson or that conversation. But the thing about talking about drugs and alcohol is that we have research that tells us that kids do listen. When we think about how kids grow up or how we grew up, our family values, whatever they were, stuck with us and likely shaped how we felt and how we thought and felt about the world. Thinking about our political beliefs or our sports teams that we like. Whatever the case is, we help shape our kids' ideas about things. And if they don't know what you think, they will guess and then make up their own. And yes, their friends are really important. And they do change what they think, but they should have a starting ground. And having that be a really frank and open conversation with you as the parent, that's really important. And so they may act like they don't hear you, and they may roll their eyes and tell you that you don't understand. Doesn't matter. You're just letting them know where you stand and somewhat setting up for your expectations in the future. But it does matter, and it is important.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's so good. It kind of leads me to this next question of why do you think parents avoid it? Like that feels like a myth of like they feel like their kids aren't going to listen anyway. But because I think there's some like aversion to it or fear around it. How would you categorize that?
So I think as parents, we have aversion, most of us, to having the sex talk and having a drug and alcohol conversation. The sex talk, I think, is because it makes us uncomfortable and we're worried about giving them permission.
Mm-hmm.
And with drugs and alcohol conversation, I think it is permission and putting ideas in their head that perhaps they didn't have yet, not really knowing how early to have that conversation or how much to share. And for some parents having to answer the question of, well, what were you like? Or what was your experience? Because normally kids don't want to hear our experience about what they're going through because we don't understand and no one in the history of the world has felt that way. And so in this instance, though, they do want to know. And that can be really hard. And that's something that I address in the course is getting clear around your values, your own values around substance use and what you want to share, because it just takes a little bit of prep work. And then you can answer those questions rather than being on the spot. But I do think there's the fear of giving them permission, putting ideas in their head, and not knowing what to say.
Yeah, which is, I think, an important point of they're living in the world, right? So they're going to be getting information left and right, maybe earlier than you would want, or from a show or from a friend or anything, right? So again, this idea that we're like protecting or shielding or not giving information, if they're not getting it from us, they won't get it anywhere, which is not true at all, right? And so finding ways to have honest conversations with our kids is imperative, especially right now.
It is, and our kids are finding out far more than we want them to, which sucks. And it is the reality of raising kids in this environment. And I love the internet. It's done great things. The internet is what's allowing you and me to talk and to even meet, since we have never met in person. And when a kid wants to know something, they Google it, whatever it is. And they're doing it from the privacy of their phone. And they're very adept at hiding what they were looking at. And you can't spend all your time monitoring every single thing, because not everybody's parent is doing that. And so I'm not suggesting that you have no boundaries about what kids are doing and what they're engaging with online, because I think that's dangerous too. But accepting that there's going to be an influx of information that you probably wouldn't want or like, and that you can't stop and probably won't know about, that's what you're preparing them to handle. You're giving them tools to manage that, because they likely won't tell you that their friend told them this, that, and the other thing. You likely won't know that until they have their own kids and they're like, "Hey, Mom, remember that friend I had?" Like, that's when we tell our parents the truth about that stuff. And so for your kids, we can't live in fear of it. And instead, we're giving them tools and trying to keep the door open, because we are the most important adults in their life. And we're going to always be. Even when they are adults, even when they are parents, it's going to be us. And we want to set a precedent about how we're going to do things going forward.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. Giving parents permission to do that. And again, I love the way you said, like, preparing them for when they're going to Google something that they shouldn't, or Google something that they're curious about, and how to like keep that communication open of like, yeah, just because they have access to everything, right? And it just is a lot to handle on a sweet teen brain.
Yeah, it is.
So can you talk about how you fell into being a substance use counselor, and then also kind of niching in teens as well? Like, what is your story? I was like, what is your trauma as a therapist?
Right.
That led you to this work. Obviously share as much as you want, but I'd just love to know more about your journey in it.
So when I was a teenager, I was a super disastrous hot mess. And my mom just could not get control of me at all. Once my parents got divorced when I was in 6th grade, she, I think, lost control of me then. And mom guilt for, my daughter is upset, I'm just going to not punish her, or I'm not going to have consequences, or I'm just going to overlook things. And unfortunately, I learned the wrong lesson, which is I can do what I want. And so I had always been oppositional and always wanted to do what I wanted. Getting into trouble and pushing the envelope was just how I did things. And while I still went to class and looked like an average kid, I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol young, at least for my class. And I loved it. And I wanted to keep using, because I felt like I had found the answer to life, God, and everything. And so I wasn't one of those kids who experimented and then slowly moved into using. It was the next day that I was like, and I'm not being sober again. And so that started pretty close to 3 years of constant being high on something. or drinking if I absolutely couldn't find something else. And I remember having to go see therapists. My mom blackmailed me into it. She, by then, had tried to figure out how to manage me and knew that there were, simple parenting stuff wasn't going to work. So she went through my stuff, and we had notes, my friends and I, that we had written back and forth. Why we wrote things down on paper, I don't know, because that's like, do you even crime? Like, and so she found out who I was using with and threatened to call their parents if I didn't go to therapy.
Oh.
And she had me. There was literally no way around it. She had the names, and I couldn't be a snitch. And so I was like, fine, I'll go to therapy. Well, I ended up seeing 9 therapists total. And
from like what span of years?
Oh no, this is like in 6 months.
Wow.
And it wasn't 10 because the 9th one was the right one. And her name is Betsy, and she was not a substance use counselor. She was a social worker and a therapist. And I'm not sure what she said to me, but I remember being impressed. And she somehow asked me something and caught me off guard. And I was like, okay, maybe. And she just had a way of talking to me that I felt like she saw me, respected me as not necessarily an adult, but as a whole person. And that my feelings and experiences were valid and they didn't change because I was young. And so I was willing to see her. And during that time I was seeing her, I remember having a thought about, I could do this someday. Someday when I am older and sober, I could work with kids like me.
Wow.
And I did that. And I did that in kind of a mentoring role in college once I was sober, and then went to grad school. And teens who are using drugs and hate everybody are my specialty.
Oh, I bet you have a line out the door.
and they're my favorite.
Yeah.
Because they typically don't mind me. And it is sometimes, I think, difficult for parents to trust me that I will let them know if their kid's in danger without needing to know every detail that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of things about my clients that I don't share with their parents, but I'm judging risk and trying to help be the adult voice that they will hear. And so that's how I wound up doing what I do. And I'm also, because of all of that and getting sober, I'm a person in recovery, and I've been in recovery for a long time. And so it's really important to me to share the message of recovery with folks. And I also really wanted to work with trauma and have found that it is really fulfilling and seeing people get better and move forward. And that has just been incredible. So that's how my specialties became what they are.
What a beautiful story. I love that the idea, again, like, what's your trauma? We get to turn into something really empowering, and we get to, that's connection, right? That's how we connect. That's how we know. That's how we understand our clients on the other side, is like, oh, I've been there. I know exactly what this feels like. And this is how I got through it, right? And let me be there for you or provide a space for you. So you're just doing really, really important work. I don't know I just could never do teens or children. I mean, probably some of my own stuff I probably have to look back on. But I just think people that provide spaces for teens, especially just have like a special place in heaven, if there is a heaven, right? Like there's just doing such good work, because, you know, parents are struggling and they are dealing with a lot, and there's a lot of things coming at them. I think they feel a little bit out of control. So to have a trusted therapist, which is hard to do, but necessary, right? Like your children, there's something really powerful about having your children with like another adult, a trusted adult, the space to say whatever, but it still is that guidance as an adult, right?
Yeah. And I think what's important about that is that we have a right as therapists that parents don't have to say some things. And once kids are aware that you're not going to overreact or surprise them with getting in trouble or talking to the school or to parents, and they will respect that. They are very respectful of the fact of there may be a moment that I need to talk to your parents because I'm concerned, but I will do everything in my power to tell you first, and we will talk about how to do it together. And they accept that as an adult that there is a line, and they don't mind it. They're not asking for complete silence, because kids in this age, in this generation, they're not silent the way we were. Like if somebody's being abused at home, they tell.
Yeah. Wow.
If somebody is in a dangerous relationship, they'll go to a teacher or to somebody's parent. Like they don't keep things quiet like we had to. Mm-hmm. And I'm not even saying like I didn't have that kind of trauma in my family, but we didn't have the line of, I will torch our friendship to the ground to keep you safe.
Right.
And these kids do and will.
Wow.
They will call the police and send cops for a welfare check.
Wow.
And it's a really different experience than what we went through. Mm-hmm. And so they expect that there are lines and that it has to do with safety and life and death situations. And so they're not deterred by that. And so it's a very different experience than, I don't know, than I remember. We would never interfere in someone else's family. And kids now will just go to a teacher and be like, I saw bruises. You know, like it's very different.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool, but it changes the relationship with the adults around them. And so they're not looking for me to be 100% a vault.
Right.
They want to know that they can trust me with 90% of what they have. Mm-hmm. And that I will consult them if we have to change that. So that's how you work with kids. But yeah, I know how you feel. I understand how you feel about working with kids. That's how I feel about middle schoolers, because I hate middle schoolers. It's not their fault that they're cretins, but it's awful. Like we should cryo freeze them for 3 years and then wake them up.
Yeah.
But there are people who love middle schoolers. They are their favorite. And it makes me itchy. Like I just can't even. I would rather have 5-year-olds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And spend my life playing Candyland, you know?
Yes. That's so true. It's so true. And I think when you allow yourself to do what you love or be with the people that are interesting or fun for you, then there's something magical that happens there. You know, it's just like this right fit internally, this right fit externally, and you get to do really, really, really beautiful work. And I loved what you said about teens wanting action. Like they are expecting action if like shit hits the fan, right? We are doing action and they are doing action collectively. So this isn't as, like to your point, I think when we were younger, it was just like a hush hush thing. We're not talking about it, but meanwhile, someone's doing drugs in the bathroom, you know, like, and it's okay. So, yeah, I love that. That's such a great point. What do you think is happening for teens today in the substance abuse realm that is different from when we grew up? Like, what are they challenged with that is different from how we grew up?
So I think it's access. And I remember driving to some fairly dangerous places to pick up drugs and meeting with strangers, making phone calls, and all of that had to happen before 10 o'clock at night because no one's calling a landline.
Right.
You know, drug dealers still live with parents sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, so, and not always. I mean, the heavier drugs that you need, the less likely that is, right? But access is really, really different. Like, I've worked with kids who were dealing drugs on Snapchat.
Wow.
Like, that was their platform. And that's how they spoke to their suppliers across the country. And so we have our kids and our teenagers have access to people all over the world, all over town, 24 hours a day. And we never had that. I think I would have been, I don't know that I'd be alive, frankly, because it would have given me so much access. And I managed to put myself in very difficult and dangerous situations as a naive, grunge, wannabe, you know.
Yeah.
From
no frontal cortex development
from suburbs
there.
of Chicago. You know, so like I took the train and got my ear pierced at like a Woolworths in Chicago when I was like 15. And he's like, "You're 18, right?" I'm like, "Yep." I mean, who does that? That's what kids in the suburbs do. We were like, we are big. We will go down there. And I think about the neighborhoods I was in and I was like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So I think access is really, really different. And it's not just access to drugs, but access to people and older people. So someone you go to school with, their older sibling, you just friend them on whatever network they're using. And that's fine. And it's not weird when...
It's appropriate.
Right. If you wanted to get a hold of your older siblings' friends, that would have been challenging.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's one piece. I think the second piece is more acceptance of drugs in general. Partially, legalization of marijuana has kind of moved that forward. And the internet is diluting information. I had one of my girls say to me the other day, I shouldn't call her a girl, she's 21 now, but I met her when she was a teenager. But she told me that she uses TikTok like Google. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what did you say? Mm-hmm. And so when she needed some information about something, she went to TikTok and put in what she needed. And then that was gospel truth, as opposed to, if you're going to type it out, why not just go to Google? But they want information and they want it fast, even though they will acknowledge that it might not be accurate. And so they have no real standard for what to believe and what not to believe, which makes it even more imperative that we are sharing good information, because we can't trust what's out there. And that's challenging for everything, anything I look for. And I'm like, okay, who is saying this? Who paid for this study? Where is this coming from? And that kind of critical thinking they're taught to do in school in some ways, but on their personal time, everything is a 1.5-minute video. And it feels like I'm having a get off my lawn moment when I say, like, that's going to bite us in the ass. But it is.
It even happens to me, and I'm a grown adult. And I'm like, oh, What the information that I get on TikTok where it doesn't influence me is all the mental health stuff. I'm like, oh, well, this is dumb. Like, this doesn't make sense. This is half the truth. This is like, but everything else does feel like, oh, and then you hear the same people or multiple people saying somewhat of the same things because they've caught on to this like watered down version of the truth. And then and they're so relatable. It's like somebody their age saying, oh, there was a study on this, and this is what this is. And so you think you have ADHD, you probably do, or whatever. There's just a relatableism. I don't even think that's a word, but of that person on that screen, and they can say whatever they want. And if they have the hashtag, it must be true. Hashtag ADHD. It must be it, right? Ugh.
And we have kids, there was a while, I think last year, that a bunch of kids said, a bunch of kids were thinking they had dissociative identity disorder.
Wow.
And I'm just going like, TikTok.
Wow.
That's what this is.
That's it.
Who hasn't felt like more than one person when you're in high school?
Right. Exactly.
It's identity formation. That's the point.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Same way of trying on different attitudes and behaviors. That's the whole point of that time period. At least in the US, as we have adolescence the way it is, that's what they're doing. In other places, in other countries, they might have been moving towards being in the workforce or doing something else in the family. We have this time period of adolescence where they're allowed to and expected to try on different things. So TikTok, I can usually tell what's happening by what I'm hearing, by what
it's
people
the
are
same, right? Like a collective. Yeah, isn't that wild?
Yeah. And my clients will send me TikToks.
Yeah,
like to watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have some clients too. They're like, "Oh, I saw this," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's great, so good." It's like in my mind, I'm like, I said that multiple times over the years that we've been working together, but I'm glad it's finally landing. Again, it's just that like,
right,
relatable-ism in a really pretty 30-second video or 60-second video that like sums up everything, and you're like, it's just interesting. It can be really helpful, but also really hurtful. Again, for teens that don't have that critical thinking yet, or the context, or to ask the questions around it, where I think adults have more of that, but we can also be easily sucked into. That saying, which is very true, like if the product is free, then you're the product. So, right? So TikTok is free, Instagram is free. You become advertised to. You become like the avatar. You become everything that they want to sell you, which is very similar to how kids are getting their information of like, oh, well, this must be true, right? So yeah, it's just, we can dive deep all day on that. But I would love to kind of wrap up here because we have a juicy part 2 that we are going to do. So thank you so much, Betsy, for being here. If you're listening and ready for part 2, we're going to dive deeper into talking to your kids about marijuana and more about the course. And we can't wait to see you there. So thank you so much, Betsy.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to our show. We hope we've helped you understand what our kids are facing today and given you some insight within the therapy room. If you are a parent and are ready to have a conversation with your kid, check out Betsy's course, Talking to Your Kids About Marijuana, on the How We Get Through app. It's available for both Android and iPhone. Stay tuned for part 2 with Betsy as she sets the record straight about the actual facts about marijuana and how you can support your kids. See you there.